The crosshairs settled on the woman's back as she stumbled through the undergrowth, blood seeping through her torn jacket. Three armed men closed in their boots, crushing dead leaves in the darkness. She had nowhere left to run until a shadow moved between the trees. The hunters didn't know they'd just entered the territory of Daniel Hayes, a single father who'd buried his Navy SEAL past along with his wedding ring. Tonight, that past was about to claw its way back to the surface. Stay with me to see how one man's quiet life explodes into chaos when the woman he saves brings war to his doorstep. Comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The rain started at dusk, fat drops that turned the mountain roads of Cedar Hollow into rivers of mud. Daniel Hayes stood at his kitchen window, watching the storm roll across the pine-covered ridges, while Sophie, his 8-year-old daughter, worked on her math homework at the table behind him. The pencil scratched against paper in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to their quiet life. "Dad, what's 7 times 8? Sophie asked, her voice cutting through the drumming rain. "You know this one, sweetheart. Count it out." She groaned dramatically the way only 8-year-olds could manage. "But it's hard." "Hard things are worth doing." Daniel said the words automatic, borrowed from a different life when he'd said them to younger men preparing for war. He turned from the window, catching his reflection in the dark glass, a face that had aged beyond its 38 years' eyes, that held too many ghosts. The security company radio on the counter crackled to life. "Hayes, you there?" Daniel picked up the handset. "Go ahead, Mike." "Got a sensor trip on the north perimeter of the Brennan property. Probably just a deer, but the old man's paranoid about poachers. Can you swing by?" Daniel glanced at Sophie, who was now doodling in the margins of her homework. Mrs. Chen from next door could watch her for an hour. She always could. "Give me 20 minutes, he said into the radio. Sophie looked up, her brown eyes, her mother's eyes, already knowing. "You have to work. Just for a bit. Mrs. Chen will come over." "Can't I come with you?" "Not in this weather, baby girl." He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Finish your homework. I'll be back before bedtime." 20 minutes later, Daniel drove his truck along the muddy access road that bordered the Brennan property, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. The headlights swept across dark trees that seemed to press in from both sides. He'd driven this route 100 times since taking the security job 2 years ago, but tonight felt different. The air itself seemed charged electric with the kind of tension he hadn't felt since Kandahar. He pulled over near the sensor location and killed the engine. The rain hammered on the truck's roof as he grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the storm. Water immediately soaked through his jacket, but he barely noticed. His attention had shifted to something his conscious mind hadn't yet processed, that sixth sense that had kept him alive through 3 tours. The forest was wrong. Too quiet beneath the rain. No small animals rustling. No nightbirds. Daniel moved into the trees, his footsteps silent despite the wet leaves. The flashlight remained off. His eyes had already adjusted to the darkness, picking out shapes and shadows with practiced ease. 50 yards in, he found the first sign, broken branches at shoulder height, too deliberate to be wildlife. Then he heard it, labored breathing barely audible above the rain. He froze listening. The breathing came from his left, maybe 30 feet away. Not an animal. Human. In distress. Daniel approached slowly, every sense alert. Through a gap in the trees, he saw her. The woman was pressed against a massive pine trunk, trying to make herself invisible. Her dark hair was matted with rain and what looked like blood. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder, revealing a gash that needed immediate attention. She clutched something against her chest, a waterproof bag held like her life depended on it. Daniel was about to announce himself when he heard them voices coming from the north. Multiple men moving with purpose but without stealth. Hunters who believed their prey was already cornered. "She went this way," a voice called out. "Blood trail leads straight through here." The woman's eyes went wide with terror. She pushed herself away from the tree, ready to run, but her legs gave out. She fell to her knees in the mud, a sob escaping her lips. Daniel made his choice in an instant. He moved from cover, covering the distance between them in 3 quick strides. Her head snapped up, mouth open to scream, but he pressed a finger to his lips. "If you want to live, do exactly as I say," he whispered. She stared at him, calculating her options in a heartbeat. Then she nodded. Daniel pulled her to her feet, noting how she bit back a cry of pain. Can you run? I think so. Good. Stay close. He half carried her through the trees, moving perpendicular to the approaching voices. His truck was too far and they'd hear the engine anyway. But there was another option, an old ranger station abandoned for years that he'd discovered during his security rounds. More importantly, it had something the hunters wouldn't expect. The voices grew louder behind them. Found more blood. She's close. The woman stumbled, and Daniel caught her before she fell. In one smooth motion, he lifted her into his arms and ran. She weighed maybe 120 light enough that he could maintain speed even through the undergrowth. She pressed her face against his chest, her body trembling from cold and fear. The ranger station materialized from the darkness, a small wooden structure that had seen better decades. Daniel kicked the door open and set the woman down inside. Her legs immediately buckled and she caught herself on a dusty table. Thank you, she gasped. Thank you, but they'll find us. They have thermal imaging night vision. Not down there they won't. Daniel pulled aside a moldy rug, revealing a trapdoor he'd discovered months ago. The station had been built over an old Cold War-era bomb shelter, one of dozens scattered through these mountains. Can you climb down a ladder? She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. What's your name? He asked as he helped her to the trapdoor. Elena Marquez. I'm Daniel. Now climb. She descended into darkness and Daniel followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. He felt along the wall until he found the battery-powered lantern he'd left here months ago, a habit from his old life. Always have a cache, always have an exit. The shelter was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with concrete walls that wept moisture, but it was invisible to thermal imaging, and the foot of concrete and earth above them would muffle any sound. Elena collapsed against the wall, the waterproof bag still clutched to her chest. In the lantern light, Daniel could see her more clearly. Mid-30s Hispanic features with the kind of athletic build that suggested she was used to taking care of herself. The gash on her shoulder was deep but clean. No arterial damage. I need to look at that wound, he said. She nodded, exhausted. Daniel found the first aid kit he'd stashed here, another old habit, and went to work. She hissed as he cleaned the cut but didn't pull away. This needs stitches, he said. Are you a doctor? No, but I've had practice. Above them, footsteps thundered across the wooden floor. Elena tensed, but Daniel remained calm, continuing to work on her shoulder. Voices filtered down, muffled but audible. Building's empty, Marcus. Marcus. Daniel filed the name away. She didn't just vanish, another voice said, deeper, authoritative. This had to be Marcus. Check again. We've been through it twice. Maybe she doubled back. A long pause, then, spread out. She's wounded, scared, and alone. She won't get far. The footsteps moved away, but Daniel knew they wouldn't go far. These men were professionals. He could tell by how they moved, how they communicated. They'd establish a perimeter wait for dawn. They'll be back, Elena whispered. Let them come. Daniel finished bandaging her shoulder. Tell me who they are. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, private military contractors, Blackstone Solutions. Daniel's hand stilled. He knew that name, knew their reputation. They did the dirty work that governments couldn't officially sanction. Why are they after you? Elena looked at the waterproof bag in her lap. I have something they want. Something they'll kill for. What is it? She met his eyes, and he saw a flash of steel beneath the exhaustion. Proof that they murdered my father, among other things. Daniel sat back on his heels. He'd wanted a quiet life, a safe place to raise Sophie after everything that had happened. But looking at this woman wounded, hunted, but unbroken, he knew that life had just ended. My daughter, he said suddenly. I need to call. No. Elena grabbed his wrist. They'll be monitoring all cell signals in the area. Any call you make will lead them right to whoever you're calling. The words hit him like a physical blow. Sophie was at home with Mrs. Chen unprotected. If these men were as thorough as they seemed, I have to go, he said, standing. You can't. They'll kill you the moment you step outside. They can try. Elena struggled to her feet. You don't understand. These aren't ordinary mercenaries. They're ex-special forces Delta SEALs. Good, Daniel said quietly. Then it'll be a fair fight. Something in his tone made her step back. For the first time since he'd found her, she really looked at him, saw the scars on his hands, the way he moved with economical precision, the absolute lack of fear in his eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who made a promise to keep his daughter safe." He moved to the ladder. "Stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Wait!" She pulled something from the waterproof bag, a photograph. "This was my father, Captain Miguel Marquez, Navy Intelligence." Daniel took the photo, and the world tilted. He knew that face had served with him on a classified operation in Syria 8 years ago. Miguel had been a good man, one of the few intelligence officers the teams actually trusted. "When did he die?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. 6 months ago. They said it was a training accident. It wasn't. Elena's eyes widened. "You knew him?" "Yeah, I knew him." Daniel handed back the photo. "Stay here. I'll be back." He climbed the ladder, listened at the trapdoor for a full minute, then eased it open. The ranger station was empty, but through the window he could see flashlights moving through the trees. They were searching in a grid pattern, methodical and patient. Daniel slipped out the back door and melted into the forest. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, which made moving silently both easier and harder. Easier because the soft patter covered small sounds. Harder because the men hunting Elena would be able to hear better too. He counted 4 lights, which meant at least 4 men, but there would be others probably stationed on the roads watching for vehicles. They'd have night vision, body armor, automatic weapons, all the advantages, except one. They didn't know he was here. Daniel circled wide, moving through the forest like a ghost. His feet found silent paths between leaves and twigs, his body flowing around obstacles rather than pushing through them. It took him 15 minutes to work his way behind the nearest searcher. The man was good, maintaining proper spacing from his teammates, checking his 6 regularly, but he was focused on finding a wounded woman, not expecting a hunter to become prey. Daniel struck from behind his arm, snaking around the man's throat in a blood choke. The man had a fraction of a second to tense before his brain shut down from lack of oxygen. Daniel lowered him silently to the ground, zip-tied his hands and feet with the man's own restraints, and gagged him with tactical tape from the man's vest. 1 down. He took the man's radio earpiece and night vision goggles. The chatter in his ear was professional disciplined. "Sector 3 clear, moving to 4. Copy. Sector 2 clear. Maintain spacing. She's here somewhere." Daniel keyed the radio. "Sector 5 clear." He'd mimicked the unconscious man's slight Texas drawl perfectly, another skill from another life. "Roger that, Thompson." Thompson. Now he had a name to go with the unconscious face. Daniel moved toward the next searcher, but something made him freeze. A new voice on the radio, one that made his blood run cold. "All units be advised. We've identified the Good Samaritan. Daniel Hayes, former SEAL Team 6, lives about 3 miles from here. Divorced 1 daughter. I want a team on his house now." The words hit Daniel like a sledgehammer. They knew who he was. Somehow they'd identified him, which meant Sophie. The careful, methodical approach vanished. Daniel broke into a run, no longer caring about silence. He had to get to his daughter. "Movement Sector 4. Converge, all units, converge." Muzzle flashes lit up the forest. Bullets whined past Daniel's head, shredding bark from trees. He zigzagged, using the trees as cover, returning fire with Thompson's weapon. The night vision goggles turned the forest into a green-tinged hellscape of shadows and light. He's got NVGs switched to white light. Tactical lights blazed to life, destroying his night vision advantage. Daniel ripped off the goggles and kept running. His truck was just ahead. The windshield exploded as bullets tore through it. Daniel dove and rolled, coming up behind the engine block. They had him pinned. "Daniel Hayes." The voice belonged to Marcus. He recognized it from the ranger station. "We have no quarrel with you. Give us the woman and you can walk away." Daniel checked Thompson's weapon, half a magazine left. Not enough. "I've got a better idea," he called back. "You walk away and I won't have to kill you all." Marcus laughed. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, Hayes. Don't be stupid." "Wouldn't be the first time." Daniel pulled the truck's emergency kit from behind the seat. road flares, jumper cables, and perfect a can of Fix-A-Flat. He shot 3 holes in the can, then lit a road flare and threw both toward the tree line. The Fix-A-Flat exploded in a ball of flame, not dangerous, but bright and loud. Daniel used the distraction to sprint in the opposite direction back toward the ranger station. If he could get to his hidden dirt bike. Pain exploded through his left shoulder as a bullet found its mark. Daniel stumbled but kept running. Blood soaked his shirt, but he'd had worse. The ranger station came into view. He burst through the door and dropped through the trap door without using the ladder. Elena jumped, raising a pistol she'd found somewhere. "It's me," Daniel gasped. "We have to go, now." She saw the blood and paled. "You're shot." "I've been shot before. Can you ride a motorcycle?" "Yes, but..." "Then move." He grabbed the go bag he'd hidden here, cash, fake IDs, weapons, all the paranoid preparations of a man who'd made too many enemies. They climbed out of the shelter as footsteps pounded toward the station. "Back door," Daniel hissed. They slipped out as the front door crashed open. The dirt bike was hidden under a camo tarp 50 yards into the forest. Daniel ripped the tarp away and kick-started the engine. Elena climbed on behind him, pressing the waterproof bag between their bodies. "Hold on!" The bike roared to life, and Daniel twisted the throttle. They shot through the forest branches, whipping at their faces. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted. Daniel knew these woods had memorized every trail, every shortcut. The bike flew over a fallen log, landed hard, and kept going. They burst onto a fire road, and Daniel turned hard, the back wheel sliding in the mud. Elena's arms tightened around his waist as they accelerated. The main road was just ahead. A black SUV roared out of nowhere, trying to ram them. Daniel turned at the last second, the SUV's mirror clipping his shoulder. Pain flared from his bullet wound, but he held on. They shot past the SUV, which tried to turn but slid in the mud. 5 minutes later, they were on the main road racing toward town. Daniel's mind calculated rapidly. They'd have teams at his house, probably at the police station too. But there was one place they might not expect: the old Methodist church on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for years, but Daniel had played there as a kid, knew all its hiding spots. He turned off the main road onto a gravel path that led to the church. The bike's headlight illuminated the weathered wooden structure, its steeple tilting at a dangerous angle. Daniel killed the engine and half fell off the bike. Elena caught him before he hit the ground. "We need to stop that bleeding," she said. "Inside first." The church door hung on one hinge. They pushed inside, Elena supporting more of Daniel's weight with each step. The interior was a maze of overturned pews and scattered hymn books, lit by moonlight streaming through broken windows. Daniel led them to the basement door, hidden behind what had once been the altar. The basement was dry, windowless, and most importantly had a tunnel that led to the old parsonage next door, a leftover from Prohibition, when the church had been a stop on the bootlegger's route. Once they were safely in the basement, Elena helped Daniel sit against the wall. She found an old tablecloth and tore it into strips. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Just do it." She packed the wound and wrapped it tight. Daniel gritted his teeth but made no sound. When she was done, he was pale but steady. "We can't stay here long," he said. "I need to get to my daughter. They'll be watching your house." "I know. That's why we're not going to my house." He pulled out a burner phone from his go bag, one that had never been turned on completely clean. "There's someone I trust, someone they won't expect." He dialed a number from memory. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" The voice was gruff, irritated at being woken. "Tom, it's Daniel. I need you to listen very carefully." Tom Brennan, the paranoid millionaire whose property Daniel patrolled, former Marine Vietnam vet, and the only person in Cedar Hollow who knew even part of Daniel's real history. "Daniel, what's wrong?" "I need you to get Sophie, Mrs. Chen's house. Bring them both to your panic room. Do it now. Don't ask questions." There was a pause then. "How many?" "Once a Marine, always a Marine." Tom was asking about the threat. "At least 6, probably more, professional contractors. Equipment. Full tactical." "Roger that. Moving now. What about you?" "I'll be there when I can. Tom, if anyone else shows up claiming to be me, they'll leave in pieces. Go dark, brother. I've got your 6. The line went dead. Daniel leaned back, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. Sophie would be safe. Tom's compound was a fortress, and the old Marine was still deadly even at 70. Thank you, Elena said quietly. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. Even bloodied and exhausted, there was something unbreakable about her. Your father saved my life once. Syria 8 years ago. My team was compromised about to walk into an ambush. Miguel broke protocol to warn us. Elena's eyes filled with tears. He never told me about his operations. He couldn't, but he was a good man, one of the best. Daniel shifted, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. So what's really in that bag? What got him killed? Elena was quiet for a long moment, then opened the waterproof bag. Inside were documents, photographs, and a hard drive. My father was investigating something called Operation Prometheus, she said, a Black Ops program that was supposed to be shut down 5 years ago. Only it wasn't. It was privatized, sold to the highest bidder. Blackstone Solutions has been running unauthorized operations on U.S. soil, eliminating witnesses, journalists, anyone who got too close to the truth. She pulled out a photograph and handed it to Daniel. His blood ran cold. It was him, 5 years younger, in full tactical gear. Standing next to him was Marcus, the same Marcus hunting them now and in the background. That's my wife, Daniel said, his voice hollow. Ex-wife. She died in a car accident 6 months after this was taken. Elena's hand covered his. I don't think it was an accident. The words he'd never let himself think, the suspicion he'd buried with grief and guilt. Sarah's death had been too convenient, too clean. She'd been driving to meet him to tell him something important about his last mission when her car went off a cliff. No skid marks, no mechanical failure found. Your father had proof. He was gathering it when they killed him. But yes, there are documents that suggest several accidents were actually assassinations, including Sarah Hayes. Daniel closed his eyes, rage and grief warring in his chest. For 3 years he'd blamed himself. If he hadn't been deployed, if he'd been home more, if he'd chosen his family over his career. But if Elena was right, if Sarah had been murdered. I'm going to kill them all, he said quietly. No. Elena gripped his hand tighter. We're going to expose them. My father didn't die for revenge. He died for justice. Justice, Daniel laughed bitterly. You think anyone cares? You think the government doesn't already know? Some do. Some are part of it. But there are others, good people who just need proof. FBI, DOJ, even some in the CIA who've been trying to shut this down for years. She pulled out a phone, not a regular phone, but a military-grade encrypted satellite phone. I have a contact, someone my father trusted. If we can get this evidence to them, they'll bury it. They always do. Not this time. This time we have names, dates, financial records. We have recorded conversations, orders for assassinations, proof of money transfers. This time we have everything. Daniel stared at the documents spread before them. Part of him wanted to burn it all, take Sophie and run, start over somewhere else. But the larger part, the part that had once sworn an oath to defend his country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, knew he couldn't walk away. All right, he said, but we do this my way. First we get Sophie somewhere safe, really safe, not just Tom's compound. Then we make copies of everything set up, dead man switches. If they take us out, this information goes everywhere. WikiLeaks, every major newspaper, every government watchdog. Agreed. But Daniel, there's something else you need to know. The way she said it made his skin crawl. Marcus Kane, the man leading the team hunting us, he was part of your unit. SEAL Team 6. The name hit like a hammer. Marcus Kane. They'd called him Reaper for his kill count. They'd served together for 2 years before Marcus had gone private sector, chasing the big money. He knows how I think, Daniel said, how I operate. But you know him too. I knew who he was. I'm not sure anyone really knows who he is now. Daniel struggled to his feet. We need to move. They'll expand their search grid, and this is too obvious a hiding spot. Can you ride? I can do whatever I need to do. They gathered the documents and made their way through the tunnel to the parsonage. The old house was a skeleton of its former self, but it provided cover as they made their way to the edge of the property. Daniel's shoulder screamed with every movement, but he pushed through. He'd operated with worse injuries. The mission came first always. There, Elena pointed to a truck parked on the street, one of those anonymous work vehicles that no one looked at twice. Too convenient, Daniel said. Could be surveillance. But as they watched, a drunk stumbled out of a nearby bar and climbed into the truck, fumbling with his keys. Daniel made a decision. Stay here. He approached the truck as the drunk finally got the key in the ignition. Daniel knocked on the window. The man rolled it down, squinting. Yeah. You've had too much to drink, friend. How about I call you a cab? Mind your own. Daniel's hand shot through the window, pressing a pressure point that dropped the man into unconsciousness. He opened the door, caught the man before he fell, and positioned him in the passenger seat. To anyone watching, it would look like he'd passed out. Get in, he called to Elena. She ran over and climbed in as Daniel started the truck. They drove away slowly, just another work truck heading home after a long day. Where are we going? Elena asked. Tom's first. I need to see my daughter. Then we end this. The radio in the truck crackled. It was tuned to the police frequency. Daniel was about to turn it off when he heard, "All units be advised. We have reports of shots fired at the Brennan compound. Multiple casualties reported." Daniel's foot slammed on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, engine roaring. They found them, Elena said. No, Tom would never let them take him alive, and they couldn't breach his defenses without... Daniel's mind raced. Unless they had someone inside, someone Tom trusted. The truck tore through the quiet streets of Cedar Hollow, Daniel taking corners at dangerous speeds. His shoulder was bleeding through the makeshift bandage, but he didn't care. Sophie was all that mattered. They created a hill and the Brennan compound came into view. It was ablaze. The main house was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the night sky. Fire trucks were just arriving, but Daniel could see bodies on the lawn, Tom's security guards. No, Daniel breathed. He brought the truck to a screeching halt and jumped out running toward the inferno. Elena followed, shouting his name, but he couldn't hear her over the roaring in his ears. A firefighter tried to stop him. Daniel dropped him with a single punch and kept going. The heat was overwhelming, but he pushed forward, screaming Sophie's name. Then he saw him, Marcus Kane, standing by a black SUV, watching the flames with satisfaction. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Marcus smiled. He mouthed 2 words, "Too late." Daniel's world went red. He charged toward Marcus, but strong arms caught him from behind. Police officers, firefighters, all trying to restrain him. "Sir, you can't—" "My daughter is in there," Daniel roared, throwing men off like they weighed nothing. "Sophie. Oh." Then he heard it, a small voice calling from behind him. "Daddy!" Daniel spun around. There, standing next to Tom Brennan's ancient pickup truck, was Sophie. Dirty, scared, but alive. Mrs. Chen stood next to her, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets. Daniel ran to them, falling to his knees and pulling Sophie into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing. "I was so scared," she whispered. "The bad men came, but Mr. Tom, he got us out through a tunnel. He went back for his dogs, and then the house exploded." Daniel looked over at the burning compound. Tom Brennan, paranoid old Marine, had saved his daughter's life at the cost of his own. "Listen to me, baby," Daniel said, pulling back to look at Sophie's face. "I need you to be very brave. We have to go away for a while." "Are we running from the bad men?" "No, sweetheart. We're going to stop them." Elena appeared beside them. "Daniel, we have to move. Now!" Sirens wailed as more police arrived. In minutes, this place would be locked down, and Marcus had enough connections to control the narrative. They'd be painted as suspects, not victims. Daniel stood, lifting Sophie into his arms. "Mrs. Chen, do you have family somewhere else?" The elderly woman nodded. "My sister, San Francisco." "Go to her, tonight. Don't pack, don't go home first. Elena, give her 5,000 from the bag." Elena didn't hesitate, pulling cash from the go bag and pressing it into Mrs. Chen's hands. "Thank you," Daniel told the old woman, "for everything." She touched Sophie's face gently. "You keep her safe. With my life." They ran to the stolen truck, Daniel buckling Sophie into the back seat. As they drove away, he could see Marcus in the rearview mirror standing like a dark sentinel against the flames. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. Daniel thought of all the safe houses he'd set up over the years, all the contingency plans he'd never thought he'd need. But there was only one place Marcus wouldn't expect, one place that might give them the time they needed. North, he said. There's an old cabin in the mountains completely off the grid. We can regroup there, make our plan. And then Daniel met Elena's eyes, and she saw the predator that lived beneath the suburban father exterior. Then we hunt. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted by terror and adrenaline. Daniel drove through the night, taking back roads and Forest Service tracks that didn't appear on any GPS. His shoulder throbbed with each turn of the wheel, but he pushed through the pain. Elena worked beside him, using the satellite phone to send encrypted copies of the documents to multiple secure servers. Insurance in case the worst happened. "Tell me about Marcus," she said quietly. "If we're going to beat him, I need to understand him." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, remembering. Marcus was the best operator I ever served with. Ruthless, brilliant, absolutely without fear. But there was something else, something broken inside him. He didn't just excel at violence, he loved it. Why did he leave the teams? Officially, he was offered a better opportunity in the private sector. Unofficially, command was getting uncomfortable with his methods. There were rumors about what happened to prisoners in his custody, about operations that went sideways because Marcus decided to send a message instead of following orders. And now he's doing the same thing for Blackstone. No, now he's doing it for himself. Blackstone is just the latest employer. Marcus goes where the money is, where he can do what he does best without restrictions. The truck climbed higher into the mountains, the roads becoming rougher, more primitive. Finally, Daniel turned onto a track that was barely visible in the darkness. "From here we walk," he said. They woke Sophie gently, and Daniel carried her on his back despite his wounded shoulder. Elena carried the bags, following Daniel through the dark forest. After 20 minutes of hiking, a small cabin materialized from the shadows. It wasn't much, one room with a loft, no electricity or running water. But it had a wood stove supplies for a month, and most importantly, it was invisible. Daniel had bought it under an alias years ago, paid cash, never told anyone about it. Once inside with Sophie tucked into the bed in the loft and Elena keeping watch, Daniel finally allowed himself to examine his shoulder properly. The bullet had gone through, cleanly missing anything vital, but it needed proper treatment. Elena helped him clean and dress it properly with supplies from the cabin's medical kit. Her hands were gentle but efficient. "You've done this before," he observed. "I wasn't always a journalist. I was an army nurse before I started investigating military corruption." "What made you change careers?" "I saw too many good soldiers die for bad reasons. Someone needed to ask why." Daniel studied her face in the lamplight. There was strength there, but also compassion. It was a dangerous combination, the kind that made people take on fights they couldn't win. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I hope so." She finished taping the bandage. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. The operation you were on with my father, Operation Prometheus, what really happened?" Daniel leaned back, memories flooding back. "We were told it was a capture/kill mission. High-value target in Syria, someone selling chemical weapons to terrorists. But when we got there," he shook his head, "it was a family, parents, 3 kids. Your father tried to abort the mission, said the intelligence was wrong, but Marcus followed the original orders. He killed them. All of them. Said dead witnesses couldn't contradict the official story." Elena's face paled. "And my father reported it up the chain. There was an investigation, supposedly, but nothing happened to Marcus. He left the team 6 months later with full honors and a lucrative contract with Blackstone. And my father kept investigating. Until they killed him for it." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the truth heavy between them. "We're going to stop them," Elena said finally. "All of them. It won't bring back the dead." "No, but it might save the living." Daniel looked up at the loft where Sophie slept. His daughter, innocent of all this violence and corruption. She deserved a world where men like Marcus Kane couldn't operate with impunity. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow we start planning. We'll need resources, allies, and a way to get this information to someone who can actually do something with it. I have contacts." A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on leaves, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. Daniel moved silently to the window, peering out into the darkness. 3 figures moving toward the cabin in tactical formation. "They found us," he whispered. "Get Sophie. Back door. Now." Elena moved toward the ladder, but it was too late. The front door exploded inward and men in tactical gear stormed in. Daniel reacted instantly, grabbing the nearest attacker and using him as a shield as the others opened fire. The cabin filled with the deafening sound of automatic weapons. Daniel threw the man he was holding into the others and dove for his rifle. He came up firing, dropping one attacker with a double tap to the chest. The man's body armor absorbed the rounds, but the impact knocked him down. Elena had grabbed a pistol and was returning fire from the loft, keeping the attackers' heads down while shielding Sophie with her body. "Go!" Daniel shouted. "Window." She didn't hesitate. Elena grabbed Sophie and jumped through the loft window, a 15-foot drop to the ground below. Daniel heard them hit and keep running. He laid down covering fire and followed, diving through the main floor window as bullets shredded the wall where he'd been standing. He hit the ground hard, his wounded shoulder screaming, but rolled to his feet and ran. "Daddy!" Sophie's terrified voice cut through the darkness. Daniel found them 20 yards into the forest, Elena trying to carry Sophie while limping badly. She'd injured her ankle in the fall. "Here!" He scooped Sophie up with his good arm. "This way." They ran deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Daniel knew these woods had walked them 100 times, but their pursuers had night vision and were gaining ground. Then he remembered the old mine shaft abandoned for 50 years. It was dangerous, unstable, but it might be their only chance. "Trust me," he told Elena, and led them to what looked like solid ground covered in leaves. "Jump when I do," he said, and then stepped into nothing. They fell 8 feet into darkness, landing in a pile of decades-old mining debris. Sophie cried out, but Daniel covered her mouth gently. "Shh, baby, we have to be quiet." Above them, footsteps approached. Daniel could see flashlight beams dancing across the opening. "They came this way," a voice said. "Track's clear. Check the perimeter. They couldn't have gone far." The footsteps moved away, but Daniel knew they'd be back. The mine shaft extended deeper into the mountain he'd explored it once years ago. It was dangerous, but staying here was certain death. "Can you walk?" he asked Elena. She tested her ankle. "I think so." They moved deeper into the mine, Daniel using his phone's flashlight sparingly. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to move single file. Sophie whimpered, terrified of the darkness and the tons of rock above them. "It's okay, sweetheart," Daniel whispered. "Remember the story I used to tell you about the brave princess who went underground to fight the dragon?" "This isn't a story," Sophie sobbed. "No," Daniel agreed. "But you're still brave." They kept moving, the tunnel branching and twisting. Daniel tried to remember the layout from his previous exploration, but everything looked the same in the darkness. Then he heard the sound of running water. "This way!" The tunnel opened into a larger chamber where an underground stream had carved a channel through the rock. The water was freezing, but it led out. Daniel remembered it emerged near a waterfall 2 miles down the mountain. "We have to go through the water," he told them. "Daniel, she's 8 years old," Elena protested, "and if we stay here, she won't make it to 9. The harsh truth silenced any argument. Daniel lifted Sophie onto his back. "Hold on tight, baby. Don't let go no matter what." They entered the stream. The water was knee-deep and moving fast, the current trying to pull them off their feet. The cold was shocking, like thousands of needles piercing their skin. Sophie gasped, but didn't cry out. They waded through the darkness, the stream gradually deepening. Soon it was up to Daniel's chest, and he had to hold Sophie higher to keep her head above water. Elena struggled beside them, her injured ankle making each step agony. Then they heard voices echoing from the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers had found the mine. "Faster," Daniel urged. The stream turned into rapids, the water white and violent. Daniel grabbed Elena's hand just as the current swept her off her feet. For a terrifying moment, he was holding both of them against the force of the water, his wounded shoulder feeling like it was tearing apart. Then the bottom dropped out. They plunged down a waterfall, falling through darkness into a deep pool. Daniel kept his grip on Sophie, turning his body to take the impact. They hit hard, the cold water driving all breath from their lungs. Daniel kicked toward the surface, his lungs burning. They broke through, gasping. Sophie was coughing, but conscious. Elena surfaced beside them, spluttering. "Swim for the shore," Daniel commanded. They dragged themselves onto a rocky beach, shivering violently. They were outside the mine entrance now, 100 feet above them, but they couldn't stop. The cold would kill them as surely as bullets if they didn't find shelter and warmth. Elena pointed to lights in the distance, a house maybe a quarter-mile away. They stumbled toward it, Daniel carrying Sophie, who was now semi-conscious from cold and exhaustion. The house was small, modest, with smoke rising from the chimney. Daniel didn't hesitate. He kicked in the door. An elderly man jumped up from his chair, reaching for a shotgun, but froze when he saw them. A wounded man carrying a child, a limping woman, all of them soaked and shivering. "Please," Daniel said, "we need help." The old man lowered the shotgun. "Jesus Christ, Mary! Get blankets and the medical kit." An elderly woman appeared, took one look at them, and immediately went into caretaker mode. Within minutes, they were wrapped in blankets by the fire, hot soup pressed into their hands. "Should I call an ambulance?" the old man asked. "No," Daniel and Elena said simultaneously. The old man studied them more carefully. "You're that family from the news. The ones they're saying started the fire at the Brennan place." "We didn't," Elena started. "I know," the old man interrupted. "Tom Brennan was my friend for 40 years. He called me tonight, told me if anyone showed up looking like they'd been through hell, I was to help them." He pulled out a set of keys. His backup plan. "There's a truck in my barn supplies in the bed. He said you'd know where to go." Daniel closed his eyes, gratitude and grief warring in his chest. Even in death, Tom was watching his six. "Thank you," he managed. "Don't thank me. Just stop whoever did this to Tom." They changed into dry clothes the couple provided. Daniel's shoulder was properly treated, and Sophie was bundled into multiple layers. The old man's wife made them take food water and a thermos of hot coffee. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Better you don't know," Daniel replied. The truck was old but solid, with a full tank and supplies for a long journey. As they drove away, Daniel saw the old couple standing in their doorway watching them go. Good people who'd risked everything to help strangers. "Where did Tom mean for us to go?" Elena asked. Daniel smiled grimly. "He had a brother in Montana, former CIA. If anyone can help us get this information to the right people, it's him." "That's a long drive." 15 hours if we push it, but first we need to make a stop." "Where?" "My storage unit. There are things there we'll need." They drove through the rest of the night, Sophie sleeping fitfully in the back. As dawn broke, they pulled into a storage facility on the outskirts of a small town 50 miles from Cedar Hollow. Daniel punched in the code, and the gate opened. Unit 47 was in the back, away from cameras. Inside was his past weapons, communications, equipment cache, in multiple currencies and documents he'd hoped never to need again. "My God," Elena breathed. "You were preparing for war." "I was preparing to disappear," Daniel corrected. "But war will do." He loaded specific items into duffel bags, encrypted satellite phones, night vision equipment, body armor that would fit Elena, and weapons. Lots of weapons. "Is all this legal?" Elena asked. "Does it matter anymore?" She had no answer to that. As they loaded the truck, Daniel's tactical phone, one that only 3 people in the world had the number for, buzzed. He looked at the message, and his blood ran cold. "Hello, brother," it read. "Nice disappearing act at the mine. But you can't run forever. I have something you want. You have something I need. Let's make a deal." M. Attached was a video. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. It was Tom Brennan, bloodied but alive, tied to a chair. "He's alive," Daniel breathed. Tom looked into the camera and spoke, his voice rough but unbroken. "Daniel, don't you dare trade yourself for me. You protect that little girl. That's an order, Marine." Marcus's voice came from off camera. "Touching. But here's the thing, Daniel. I know you. You won't let him die. Storage Unit 47 wasn't it. You have 10 minutes before I start removing pieces of your friend." Daniel looked around. They'd been tracked. Probably had been since they left the mine. This had all been orchestrated to get them here. Get in the truck, he told Elena. Take Sophie and go. No, we're not splitting up. This is my fight. This became our fight the moment they killed my father. Elena's eyes blazed with determination. We do this together or not at all. Daniel wanted to argue, but there was no time. Marcus would make good on his threat. Sophie stays in the truck, he said. No matter what. Agreed. They positioned the truck for a quick escape. Sophie huddled in the back with strict instructions to stay down and hidden. Daniel and Elena took defensive positions behind concrete barriers. They didn't have long to wait. 3 SUVs roared into the storage facility surrounding them. Men in tactical gear deployed with military precision. And then Marcus Kane stepped out. He hadn't changed much in 5 years, same cold eyes, same predator's grace. He was holding a tablet showing Tom still alive, but clearly in pain. Daniel, Marcus called out, it's been too long. Not long enough, Marcus laughed. Come now, is that any way to greet an old teammate? We bled together, brother. We're not brothers, we never were. No, Marcus agreed. I was always better. That's why they chose me for Prometheus. You were too soft, too bound by rules and conscience. Those weren't rules. They were principles. Principles. Marcus spat the word. Your principles got Sarah killed. The words hit like a physical blow. Daniel's finger tightened on his trigger. Oh, you didn't know, Marcus continued. She was going to expose the program. Somehow, she'd gotten access to classified files. We gave her a chance to walk away, but she was just like you, too principled, so we had to remove her from the equation. Daniel stood up from cover, his rifle aimed at Marcus's head. Every man in the facility raised their weapons in response. There it is, Marcus said softly. There's the killer I trained with, the one who could put a bullet through a man's eye at 1,000 yards and sleep like a baby that night. I'm going to kill you, Daniel said quietly. Eventually, but not today. Today you're going to give me the evidence the woman has, and I'm going to let you walk away. You can take your daughter and disappear. New identities, new life far from all this. And Tom made his choice when he helped you, but I'm feeling generous. The evidence for both your lives. Elena stepped out from her cover, the waterproof bag in her hands. You want this? Marcus's eyes gleamed. Very much. Then come get it. She pulled out a lighter and held it to the bag. One step closer and it all burns. You're bluffing. That's your father's legacy. My father's legacy is standing up to men like you. The flame danced closer to the bag. So, here's our counteroffer. You release Tom, you and your men leave, and we all walk away. Otherwise, everything burns, and you explain to your employers how you lost the evidence. Marcus considered this, then smiled. You know what? You're right. He raised his tablet and pressed something. On the screen, Tom Brennan jerked once, then went still. A red hole appeared in his forehead. No, Daniel roared. Now you have nothing to bargain with, Marcus said calmly. And I'm done playing games. What happened next occurred in slow motion and lightning speed simultaneously. Daniel fired his bullet, catching the man next to Marcus in the throat. Elena threw the bag not at Marcus, but high into the air and dove for cover. The facility erupted in gunfire. Daniel moved like water, like death itself. He flowed between vehicles using angles and cover, picking off targets with mechanical precision. This wasn't the suburban father anymore. This was the warrior, the predator, the angel of death he'd once been. Elena fought beside him, not with his skill, but with desperate courage. She wounded 2 men, kept others pinned down, bought Daniel the time he needed. Bodies fell. Blood painted the concrete, and through it all Marcus stood untouched, watching with something like pride. That's it, he called out over the gunfire. That's the Daniel I remember, the one who killed 17 men in Ramadi with nothing but a knife and rage. Daniel emerged from behind an SUV, his rifle empty. Marcus faced him, also out of ammunition. They stood 20 feet apart, surrounded by the dead and dying. Just you and me now, Marcus said, dropping his empty weapon, the way it should have been years ago. They moved simultaneously, meeting in a clash of fists and fury. Marcus was skilled, brutal, going for killing blows with every strike. But Daniel had something Marcus didn't, something to protect, someone to fight for. The battle raged across the storage facility. They used everything as weapons, pipes, chains, broken glass. Both men bled from dozens of wounds, but neither would yield. Finally, Daniel managed to get Marcus in a chokehold. He squeezed with all his remaining strength, feeling Marcus struggle, then gradually weaken. "Do it," Marcus gasped. "Kill me. Become me." Daniel wanted to. God, how he wanted to. But then he heard Sophie crying in the truck, heard Elena calling his name, and he knew. Killing Marcus would be easy. Living with Sophie being the father she deserved, that was hard. He released Marcus, who collapsed gasping to the ground. "You're done," Daniel said. "The evidence is already uploaded to a dozen servers. In 1 hour, every major news outlet and law enforcement agency gets copies unless Elena makes a call. You run now, maybe you get away. Maybe you find a non-extradition country to hide in. But your war is over." Marcus laughed, blood running from his mouth. "You think you've won? You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved. You've won a battle, not the war. Then we'll fight the war, but you won't be part of it." Daniel turned his back on Marcus and walked toward Elena and Sophie. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, showing mercy to the man who'd killed Sarah, who'd killed Tom. But it was also the most important. He wasn't going to become Marcus Kane. The knife entered his back just below the shoulder blade. Daniel gasped, stumbling forward. He heard Elena scream, heard Sophie cry out, "Daddy!" But all he could focus on was Marcus's voice in his ear. "You always were too soft." Daniel spun the knife still in his back and struck Marcus's throat with the edge of his hand. It was a killing blow delivered with precision. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, then acceptance. He fell to his knees, then forward, and moved no more. Daniel collapsed beside him, his vision darkening. Elena was there, pressing something against the wound, shouting for him to stay with her. Sophie's face appeared above him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "It's okay." "The ambulance is coming," Elena said. "Hold on." Daniel could hear sirens in the distance. He looked at the bag Elena had thrown. It had landed safely on top of a truck intact. "Make the call," he told her. "Send everything. End this." Elena pulled out the satellite phone with bloody hands and made the call. Across the country, servers activated, files transferred, and the truth began to spread like wildfire. As the ambulance arrived and paramedics swarmed around him, Daniel held Sophie's hand and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The war wasn't over. There would be investigations, trials, more danger to come. But for now, in this moment, holding his daughter's hand while Elena stood guard over them both. Daniel Hayes was no longer running from his past or fighting alone. He had found something worth living for, worth fighting for, worth bleeding for. He had found family. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Sophie's small hand in his, of Elena's voice, arguing with someone in the hallway. The knife had missed his lung by millimeters, the doctor said. Lucky, they called him. Daniel didn't feel lucky. He felt the weight of Tom Brennan's death, of all the deaths pressing down on him like a physical thing. "Mr. Hayes," a woman's voice unfamiliar. Daniel opened his eyes to find a FBI agent standing at his bedside, badge displayed. "I'm Special Agent Rivera. We need to talk about what happened at the storage facility." "Not without a lawyer," Elena said from the doorway, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. "Ms. Marquez, 6 men are dead. We have surveillance footage of self-defense," Elena interrupted. "We've already provided all evidence to your office, to the DOJ, to everyone. You want to arrest someone, start with Blackstone Solutions." Rivera's expression softened slightly. "We're not here to arrest anyone. In fact, we're here to protect you. The files you released, they've caused quite a stir. There are a lot of powerful people who want you silenced." Daniel tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his back. "Where's my daughter?" "Safe," Rivera assured him. "We have agents with her in the children's wing. Ms. Marquez insisted on a separate, secure area." Smart. Elena had learned fast that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Daniel looked at Rivera more carefully. Mid-40s, competent with the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much corruption and being unable to stop it. "You knew," he said. "Your agency knew about Prometheus." Rivera was quiet for a moment. "Some of us suspected, but suspicion isn't evidence. What you've provided, it's going to change everything." "Or nothing," Daniel countered. "How many investigations have been buried? How many witnesses have disappeared? This time is different." "Why?" "Because this time the whole world is watching." Rivera pulled out a tablet showing news feeds from around the globe. The leaked documents were everywhere, front-page headlines trending on social media, the subject of emergency congressional hearings. "You've started something that can't be stopped." Daniel wasn't convinced, but before he could respond, commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouting, then the sound of fighting. Rivera's hand went to her weapon. The door burst open. A man in a doctor's coat stood there, but Daniel recognized the stance, the way he held himself. "Operator." The man raised a silenced pistol. Rivera was fast, but not fast enough. The first shot took her in the shoulder, spinning her around. Elena launched herself at the attacker, but he backhanded her into the wall. The pistol swung toward Daniel. Time slowed. Daniel could see the man's finger tightening on the trigger, could calculate the trajectory of the bullet that would end his life. But he couldn't move fast enough, not with his injuries. The window exploded inward. A figure in black tactical gear swung through on a rappelling rope, firing before his feet even hit the floor. The fake doctor crumpled his shot, going wide. The tactical operator, Daniel couldn't see his face behind the balaclava, swept the room with his weapon, then spoke into a throat mic. "Package secure. One friendly wounded, need medical now." More operators flooded the room, setting up defensive positions. One knelt beside Rivera, applying pressure to her wound. The first operator approached Daniel's bed and pulled off his balaclava. Daniel's breath caught. He knew that face: Jake Morrison, former Delta Force, a man he'd worked with on 3 operations before Jake had supposedly died in Afghanistan. "Hey, brother," Jake said with a crooked smile. "Heard you could use some help." "You're dead," Daniel managed. "Officially. Unofficially, I work for people who've been trying to shut down Prometheus for years. People in the shadows who still believe in doing the right thing." "There's no such thing anymore." "Maybe not. But we're going to pretend there is." Jake helped Daniel sit up. "We need to move you, all of you. This won't be the last attempt. Where? Somewhere safe, really safe. Not witness protection safe, but black site safe. Until the hearings are over and everyone involved is either dead or behind bars." Daniel looked at Elena, who was holding a compress to a cut on her forehead. She nodded. They didn't have a choice. The move happened fast. Sophie was brought in clinging to Daniel despite his injuries. They were loaded into an armored vehicle that had somehow appeared in the hospital's parking garage. The convoy that formed around them was impressive: multiple vehicles, air support, the works. "Your guardian angel has deep pockets," Elena observed. Jake, sitting across from them, shrugged. "Let's just say there are people in high places who are very interested in seeing justice done. People who've been waiting for someone like you to provide the ammunition they needed." "And what do they want in return?" Daniel asked. "Nothing was free, especially protection like this. Testimony, full disclosure. Everything you know about Prometheus, about Blackstone, about Marcus Kane's operations." "Marcus is dead." "Marcus Kane was middle management," Jake said. "This goes all the way to the top. Defense contractors, senators, even some people in the intelligence community. Your evidence started the fire, but testimony will fan the flames." The convoy wound through the mountains for hours, finally arriving at what looked like an abandoned ski resort. But Daniel could see the subtle signs: hidden cameras, reinforced structures, fields of fire carefully mapped. This was a fortress disguised as ruins. Inside it was anything but abandoned. State-of-the-art security, comfortable living quarters, even a playground for Sophie. Other people were there too, witnesses Daniel realized. Others who'd crossed Blackstone or similar organizations and lived to tell about it. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Jake said. "You'll be safe here until it's time to testify." "When?" Elena asked. 3 weeks. Congressional hearing, closed session at first, then public. The whole world will be watching." 3 weeks. Daniel could hardly imagine being still that long, but Sophie needed stability, needed to feel safe. He watched her explore the playground, already making friends with another child whose parents were presumably also in hiding. She's resilient, Elena said, following his gaze. Like her father. She shouldn't have to be. Elena touched his arm gently. But she is. And that's what's going to get her through this. The days at Sanctuary fell into a routine. Daniel's wound healed slowly, too slowly for his liking. He spent hours being debriefed by federal prosecutors, walking them through every detail of his service, every mission that connected to Prometheus. Elena did the same with her father's investigation, the two narratives weaving together to form a damning picture of corruption and murder. Sophie adapted as children do with remarkable resilience. She attended classes with the other children, protected and taught by security-cleared teachers. At night, she still had nightmares, still called out for Daniel, but less frequently as the days passed. It was during the second week that Elena found Daniel on the observation deck, watching the sunrise over the mountains. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Haven't been able to properly sleep in years. She stood beside him close enough that he could feel her warmth in the cold morning air. What are you going to do when this is over? Assuming we survive it. Assuming that. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I used to think I'd take Sophie somewhere remote, maybe Alaska or Montana. Somewhere we could disappear, but now… He looked at Elena. Running isn't living. Sophie deserves better than a father who's always looking over his shoulder. So what's the alternative? Fight. Not with guns, but with truth. Make sure what happened to Tom, to Sarah, to your father, make sure it means something. Elena stepped closer, and Daniel found his arm going around her shoulders, natural as breathing. They'd been through hell together, saved each other's lives, and somewhere in the chaos, something had grown between them. My father would have liked you, she said softly. I'm not sure about that. I was part of the system he was fighting against. No, you were a soldier. You followed orders until those orders went against everything you believed in. Then you stood up. That takes more courage than blindly following or blindly rebelling. Before Daniel could respond, Jake appeared on the deck. His expression was grim. We have a problem, he said. Someone leaked the location of the hearings. Blackstone's moving assets into position. How many? Daniel asked, already shifting into tactical mode. Our intelligence suggests at least 3 teams. They're not going to let you testify. So we changed the location. It's not that simple. This is a congressional hearing. The location was set months ago. Security's already in place. Then increase it. Jake shook his head. You don't understand. Some of the security is theirs. We don't know who we can trust. Daniel felt the familiar weight of incoming disaster. They'd been naive to think Blackstone would simply let them testify that the rule of law still meant something to these people. What are our options? Elena asked. We can try to get you there in secret, hope we can protect you long enough to testify, or you don't go. You stay hidden, stay safe. That's not an option, Daniel said flatly. We testify, or all of this was for nothing. Jake nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then we do this smart. Multiple routes, decoy convoys, and a small team of people I trust absolutely. How small? 4 operators, including me. Any more, and we risk infiltration. 4 operators to protect them against 3 teams of Blackstone mercenaries. The odds were terrible, but Daniel had faced worse. When do we leave? Tomorrow night. We'll move under cover of darkness, take a route they won't expect. The next 36 hours passed in tense preparation. Daniel worked with Jake's team planning routes, contingencies, fallback positions. Elena prepared her testimony, organizing the evidence into a coherent narrative that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. Sophie sensed the tension and became clingy, refusing to let Daniel out of her sight. Are the bad men coming back? She asked as Daniel tucked her into bed the night before they were to leave. He wanted to lie to tell her everything would be fine, but she deserved better than comfortable lies. Maybe. But I won't let them hurt you. What about you? Will they hurt you? Daniel kissed her forehead. I'm pretty tough, baby girl, and I've got help this time. Elena's helping. Yeah, she is. Sophie considered this. I like her. She's nice, and she makes you smile. Does she? You don't smile much, Daddy, but when she's around you do. Out of the mouths of babes. Daniel hadn't realized it was so obvious, but Sophie was right. Despite everything, despite the danger and death that surrounded them, Elena made him remember what it felt like to hope. The morning of their departure dawned gray and cold, with snow beginning to fall. Perfect weather for what they had planned, the snow would provide cover and make aerial surveillance difficult. The convoy formed in the underground garage, 3 identical SUVs, all armored, all with tinted windows. Daniel, Elena, and Sophie would be in one, but even Jake's team wouldn't know which one until the last moment. "Remember," Jake said during the final briefing, "if we're hit, you don't stop. You don't try to help. You get to the safe house and wait for extraction. Clear." "Clear," Daniel confirmed, though he knew he'd never leave Jake or his team behind if it came to that. They loaded into the vehicles, Sophie clinging to her stuffed elephant, the one thing she'd managed to save from their old life. Elena sat beside them, her hand finding Daniel's as the convoy began to move. The first hour was quiet. They wound through mountain roads, the snow falling heavier now, visibility dropping. Jake's voice came through the radio, periodically checking in, confirming route changes. They were descending toward the interstate when it happened. The lead vehicle exploded, flipping through the air in a ball of fire. IED Daniel's mind cataloged automatically. The convoy scattered, training taking over. "Contact front," Jake's voice crackled through the radio. "Multiple shooters, elevated positions." The world erupted in gunfire. Bullets sparked off the armored glass of their SUV as the driver, one of Jake's men, threw the vehicle into a controlled skid, using it as cover. "Stay down!" Daniel shouted, pushing Sophie to the floor and covering her with his body. Through the windows, he could see muzzle flashes from the tree line. At least a dozen shooters positioned perfectly for an ambush. They'd known the route. Someone had leaked it. "We need to move," the driver shouted. "They'll have the road blocked ahead." "Off-road," Daniel commanded, "through the trees." The driver didn't hesitate, yanking the wheel hard right and plowing into the forest. Trees scraped against the vehicle branches, shattering against the reinforced windows. Behind them, the firefight continued, Jake and his team buying them time with their lives. They burst out of the trees onto another road, nearly colliding with a civilian pickup truck. The driver corrected tires, screaming, and accelerated toward the highway. "Jake, we're clear," Daniel said into the radio. "What's your status?" "Static." Then faintly, "Go. Safe house. We'll hold." The transmission cut off. Elena was already on the satellite phone calling for help, for backup, for anything. But Daniel knew the truth. They were on their own now. The safe house was 40 miles away, a nondescript house in a suburban neighborhood. They made it in 20 minutes, the driver pushing the damaged SUV to its limits. They pulled into the garage, the door closing behind them before the engine even stopped. "Everyone okay?" Daniel asked, checking Sophie for injuries. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but unhurt. Elena had a cut on her cheek from flying glass, but nothing serious. The driver, Daniel, finally recognized him as Mitchell, former Marine Recon, was already setting up defensive positions. "They'll find us," he said. "That ambush was too well coordinated. They knew our routes, all of them." "How long do we have?" Daniel asked. "An hour, maybe 2. Not enough time for help to arrive, assuming help was even coming. Daniel made a decision. "You take Elena and Sophie," he told Mitchell. "Get them to the hearing." "No," Elena said immediately. "We're not splitting up." "Elena?" "No." Her voice was fierce. "We do this together or not at all. That's what you told me, remember." Before Daniel could argue, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then answered on instinct. "Hello, Daniel." The voice was familiar but unexpected. Senator Patricia Walsh, chair of the Intelligence Committee. "Senator, I'm aware of your situation, the ambush, the leak it came from inside my committee. I'm handling it, but you need to know you're walking into a trap. The hearing compromised. But if you don't show they win, everything gets buried." She paused. "There's another way. The press is gathered outside the building. If you go public, if you testify in front of the cameras instead of behind closed doors, they can't stop you. They won't dare not with the whole world watching." "They'll try." "Yes. Which is why I'm sending you help. Real help. Check your door in 30 seconds. The line went dead. Daniel looked at Mitchell, who shrugged and kept his weapon trained on the door. 30 seconds passed. A knock. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Military pattern. Daniel opened the door carefully. A full tactical team stood outside 8 operators in unmarked gear. The lead operator removed his helmet, revealing a face Daniel knew well. Master Sergeant Roy Collins, his former team leader from SEAL Team 6. "Heard you could use some backup," Roy said with a grin. "You're supposed to be in Afghanistan." "Was. Until I saw what you released about Prometheus, about what they did to Sarah." Roy's expression hardened. "A lot of us have been waiting for a chance to make this right. Senator Walsh gave us that chance." Behind Roy, more vehicles pulled up. More operators, all former special forces, all men Daniel had served with or trained with, men who'd kept their honor when the system around them corrupted. "How many, Daniel asked. 42, all volunteers, all ready to ensure you make it to that hearing." For the first time since the ambush, Daniel felt hope. Not just for survival, but for victory. "Then let's end this, Shep," he said. The convoy that formed was unlike anything that had protected them before. Not official, not sanctioned, but bound by something stronger than orders, loyalty to each other and to the truth. They moved through the city like a military operation, vehicles leapfrogging operators providing overwatch from rooftops. Blackstone's teams were waiting, of course. The first attack came 10 blocks from the Capitol building. RPGs and automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. But this time, Daniel's protectors were ready. Counter-snipers eliminated threats before they could engage. Electronic warfare specialists jammed remote detonators. It wasn't a fight, it was a statement. The second attack was more desperate. Blackstone operators in stolen police uniforms tried to establish a roadblock. Roy's team went through them like paper non-lethal, but decisive. They wanted these men alive, wanted them to testify about who gave their orders. By the time they reached the Capitol, the media had been alerted. Cameras were everywhere, broadcasting live as the convoy pulled up. Daniel stepped out first, then helped Sophie down. Elena followed, the evidence bag clutched in her hands. The crowd of reporters surged forward, but Roy's team held them at a respectful distance. Daniel could see senators watching from the building's windows, some looking pleased, others terrified. The truth was coming, and there was nowhere left to hide. "Mr. Hayes," a reporter shouted, "will you testify about Operation Prometheus?" Daniel stopped at the bottom of the Capitol steps, Sophie's hand in his, Elena beside him. He looked directly into the nearest camera. "I'm going to testify about all of it," he said clearly. "About the illegal operations, the murders, the cover-ups, about how private military contractors have been conducting unauthorized operations on American soil, about how they killed my wife Elena's father and dozens of others who tried to expose them." "Can you prove these allegations?" another reporter called. Elena held up the evidence bag. "We have documents, recordings, financial records. Everything needed to prove that Blackstone Solutions and their allies in government have been operating outside the law for years." "And you'll name names?" someone asked. "Every single one," Daniel confirmed. They climbed the steps, Roy's team forming a protective corridor. At the top, Senator Walsh waited with Capitol Police, real ones, this time carefully vetted. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Marquez," she said formally, "the committee is ready for your testimony." "We testify publicly," Daniel said, "in front of the cameras." Walsh smiled slightly. "I thought you might say that. We've arranged for the hearing to be held in the main chamber. Every major network will be broadcasting live." They entered the building, footsteps echoing in the marble halls. Sophie walked between Daniel and Elena, brave despite her fear. Behind them, Roy's team maintained security ready for any last-minute attempts to stop them. The hearing chamber was packed. Senators, reporters, officials from various agencies, all waiting to hear what Daniel and Elena had to say. At the witness table, 2 chairs waited. 3. Daniel corrected mentally as a Senate aide quickly added a 3rd chair for Sophie. As they took their seats, Daniel saw the men and women scattered throughout the crowd, their bearing marking them as operators. Blackstone's last line of defense, probably armed despite security, but they couldn't act not with cameras rolling, not with the whole world watching. Senator Walsh called the hearing to order. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Marquez, you understand you're testifying under oath." "We do," they said in unison. "Then please begin." Elena went first. her voice clear and steady as she laid out her father's investigation. She showed documents, played recordings, presented evidence that was impossible to refute. The chamber was silent except for her voice and the scratch of reporters' pens. When it was Daniel's turn, he started at the beginning. His recruitment, his training, his missions. He named names, dates, locations. He described operations that were supposedly classified but had actually been illegal. He talked about Marcus Kane, about the culture of violence for profit that had infected private military contracting. And then he talked about Sarah. My wife was murdered because she discovered the truth about Operation Prometheus. He said, his voice thick with controlled emotion. She was killed on the orders of men who are probably in this room right now. Men who thought they were above the law, above justice. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Hayes. A senator interrupted Senator Graves. Daniel noted one of Blackstone's biggest supporters. Do you have proof? Daniel looked him directly in the eye. Check your bank account, Senator. The ones in the Caymans you thought were hidden. We have the records. We have everything. Graves went pale, sinking back in his chair. The testimony continued for hours. By the end, the scope of the conspiracy was clear. Dozens of operations, hundreds of deaths, billions of dollars in illegal profits, and all of it traceable, provable, undeniable. When they finally finished, the chamber erupted. Senators shouting for investigations, reporters rushing to file stories, federal agents moving to arrest those who'd been named. In the chaos, Daniel felt a small hand slip into his. Is it over, Daddy? Sophie asked. Almost, baby. Almost. But even as he said it, Daniel saw movement in his peripheral vision, one of the Blackstone operators in the crowd reaching inside his jacket. Time slowed as it always did in these moments. The operator pulled out not a weapon, but a phone. He looked at it, then at Daniel, and slowly shook his head. Whatever order he'd been waiting for, it wasn't coming. Or perhaps seeing the truth laid bare, he'd chosen not to follow it. One by one, the other Blackstone operators in the crowd stood and walked out. Not in defeat, but in surrender. The war was over. They'd lost. Outside the Capitol, the crowd had grown enormous. When Daniel, Elena, and Sophie emerged, a cheer went up. Not for celebrities or politicians, but for ordinary people who'd stood up to extraordinary evil and won. Roy's team escorted them through the crowd to waiting vehicles. Not to another safe house, but to a hotel where they could finally rest, finally process everything that had happened. That night, as Sophie slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Daniel stood on the hotel balcony looking out over the city. Elena joined him as he'd known she would. What now? She asked. Now we rebuild. Sophie needs a normal life, or as normal as possible after all this. And us? Daniel turned to her. In the chaos and violence they'd found, something neither had expected. Not just partnership, but possibility. I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Elena smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since this all began. So would I. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, the weight of the past weeks slowly lifting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, trials, testimony, the long process of justice. But tonight, they were alive, they were free, and they were together. In the room behind them, Sophie stirred in her sleep, then settled. No nightmares tonight. No running, no fear. Just peace, hard-won and precious. The news coverage continued for weeks. The trials would go on for years. But the immediate danger was over. Blackstone Solutions was disbanded, its leaders arrested or fled. The corrupt officials who'd enabled them were exposed, their careers and freedom forfeit. Daniel found them a house outside Denver, not hidden, not fortified, just a normal house on a normal street. Sophie started at a new school, made friends, joined the soccer team. She still had nightmares, sometimes still flinched at loud noises. But children are resilient. She was healing. Elena moved into the guest room, initially maintaining the fiction that she was just staying temporarily while she wrote her book about the investigation. But her toothbrush migrated to the main bathroom. Her clothes filled the empty side of the closet. Her laptop took up permanent residence on the kitchen table. One evening, 3 months after the hearing, Daniel found her there, typing furiously. How's the book coming? He asked. Almost done. Just trying to figure out the ending. How does it end? Elena looked up at him, then at Sophie playing in the backyard, then back to Daniel. I think it ends with hope, with the possibility that even after the worst darkness, people can find light again. That's a good ending. It's a beginning, really. She was right, Daniel realized. Everything they'd been through, the violence, the loss, the fight for justice, it was all just the beginning of something new. A life without looking over their shoulders. A future that belonged to them, not to the ghosts of the past. That night, as they sat down to dinner as a family, because that's what they'd become somewhere between the gunfire and the testimony, Sophie asked a question that stopped them both. Elena, are you going to marry my dad? Daniel nearly choked on his water. Elena turned bright red. Sophie, Daniel managed, you can't just... Why not? Sophie asked with 8-year-old directness. You love each other, don't you? Daniel and Elena looked at each other across the table. In that look was everything, the terror of the forest, the desperate flight through the mine, the standing together against impossible odds. But there was more, too. Quiet mornings over coffee. Shared laughter at Sophie's antics. The feeling of coming home to someone who understood the weight of the past and the fragility of the future. Yes, Elena said simply. We do. Sophie beamed. Good. Can we have cake at the wedding? The question of marriage would wait. There was no rush, no need to formalize what they already knew. They were family forged in fire and strengthened by survival. They'd fought for the truth, for justice, for each other. Now they had the harder task of learning to live in peace. But they'd do it together. As Daniel tucked Sophie into bed that night, she asked one more question. Daddy, are you happy? He thought about Tom Brennan, who'd died saving them. About Sarah, whose death had finally been avenged. About Marcus Kane, whose darkness had ultimately consumed him. About all the ghosts that would always be with him. Then he thought about Elena downstairs humming while she did dishes. About Sophie safe and loved and looking forward to tomorrow. About the life they were building from the ashes of the old one. Yeah, baby girl, he said, kissing her forehead. I'm happy. And for the first time in years, it was true. The autumn leaves were falling outside their Denver home when the first letter arrived. Daniel found it tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck. No postmark. No return address. Just his name written in precise block letters. He opened it carefully. Old habits making him check for powders or triggers. You testified. You won. But the war isn't over. They're regrouping. Be ready. A friend. Daniel showed it to Elena that evening after Sophie had gone to bed. She studied the handwriting, the paper looking for clues with her investigative instincts. Could be a crank, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. The trials have been all over the news. Lots of conspiracy theorists out there. Could be. Daniel agreed, but he started checking the house's security systems more frequently, started watching cars that lingered too long on their street. 3 days later, Jake Morrison called. He'd survived the ambush barely and spent months recovering in a CIA medical facility. His voice was different now, rougher, like something had broken inside him that couldn't be fully healed. We need to talk, Jake said. Not on the phone. Can you come to D.C.? Is Sophie safe here? For now. But Daniel, things are happening. Things that weren't in the files you released. Daniel made arrangements with Elena's cousin to watch Sophie for a few days, telling his daughter it was a work trip, nothing more. She accepted it with the resignation of a child who'd learned that sometimes adults had to do things that took them away. The flight to D.C. was turbulent, matching Daniel's mood. Elena sat beside him working on her laptop, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. They both knew this peace they'd found was fragile, possibly temporary. Jake met them at a small restaurant in Georgetown, one of those places that had been there forever, and asked no questions. He looked older, thinner, moving with the careful precision of someone managing chronic pain. Prometheus wasn't the only program, he said without preamble. It was part of something bigger, something that goes back decades. We exposed everyone involved, Elena protested. The arrests, the trials. You exposed one tentacle of the octopus, Jake interrupted. But the body is still out there, still functioning, and now it's angry. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photograph surveillance shots of men and women Daniel didn't recognize but whose bearing he knew intimately. Operators. Predators. They call themselves the Prometheus Foundation now. Jake explained. Officially, they're a think tank focused on defense policy. Unofficially, they're the survivors of Blackstone and half a dozen other contractors reorganized under new management. Who's running it? Daniel asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. We don't know the name at the top, but the operational commander is someone you know. Victoria Kane. The coffee cup in Daniel's hand cracked. Victoria Kane, Marcus's sister. Former CIA brilliant, and according to rumors, even more ruthless than her brother had been. She blames you for Marcus's death, Jake continued, but it's more than personal. The testimony you gave, the evidence you released, it cost them billions in contracts, dozens of operatives in prison. They want revenge, but they also want to rebuild. And to do that, they need you silenced. So we go to the FBI, Elena said. To the Justice Department. Jake laughed bitterly. With what rumors, suspicions? The Foundation is careful. They've learned from Blackstone's mistakes. No electronic trails, no documentation. Everything is verbal. Everything is deniable. Then why tell us? Daniel asked. Because they're planning something. My sources say it's big something that will restore their credibility and funding. And somehow you're part of it. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, but there were too many variables, too many unknowns. He needed more information, but getting it would mean stepping back into the shadows he'd been trying to escape. There's more, Jake said, his voice dropping. They have someone inside, someone close to the investigation, maybe even close to you. That's how they've been staying ahead of law enforcement. The words chilled Daniel more than any direct threat could have. Someone close to them was a traitor. Someone they trusted was feeding information to their enemies. They flew back to Denver that night, both of them silent during the flight processing what Jake had told them. As they drove home from the airport, Daniel noticed the tail immediately. Black sedan, professional spacing, textbook surveillance. We have company, he told Elena. She didn't turn around, didn't react visibly. How many pull? Just one car. They want us to know they're there, like. It was a message. We can reach you whenever we want. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he kept driving normally. No point in escalating, not with Sophie waiting at home. The sedan followed them all the way to their street, then continued past as they turned into their driveway. Through the living room window, Daniel could see Sophie doing homework at the kitchen table, Elena's cousin helping her with math problems. Normal. Safe. For now. That night, after everyone was asleep, Daniel sat in the dark living room watching the street through a gap in the curtains. The sedan was back parked 3 houses down, engine off, but occupied. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. Elena found him there at 3 in the morning. She didn't say anything, just sat beside him and took his hand. We can't live like this, she said finally. I know. Sophie deserves better. I know. So what do we do? Daniel had been thinking about that all night. Running wouldn't work. They'd proven they could find them anywhere. Going on the offensive meant becoming the very thing he'd been trying to leave behind. But there was a third option. We make them come to us, he said. On our terms, on ground we choose. That's dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. But if we control the when and where, we have a chance. Elena was quiet for a moment, then squeezed his hand. How? I need to make some calls. Old contacts, people who owe me favors, and we need to figure out who the mole is. You have a plan. The beginning of one. The next morning, Daniel started making preparations. He called Roy Collins first. The old SEAL had returned to Montana after the hearings, but he answered on the first ring. Figured I'd be hearing from you, Roy said. Jake called me yesterday. Can you help? Already am. Got 5 guys heading your way. Good ones, people I trust absolutely. Roy, I can't pay. Nobody's asking you to. Some fights you take because they're right. Next, Daniel contacted Senator Walsh's office. She was in a Judiciary Committee meeting, but her aide promised she'd call back within the hour. She did in 45 minutes. Mr. Hayes, I heard about your visit with Mr. Morrison, she said carefully. Phones weren't secure, even hers. We need to discuss the weather, Daniel said, using an old code that meant face-to-face meeting required. I'll be in Denver tomorrow for a fundraiser. Can you meet me at the Brown Palace, 2 o'clock? We'll be there. That evening, Daniel gathered everyone in the kitchen, Elena, Sophie, even Elena's cousin Maria, who'd been watching Sophie. "I need to tell you all something," he began. "There are people who want to hurt us because of what we did, because of what we exposed. I'm going to stop them, but things might get scary for a while." Sophie's face had gone pale, but she nodded bravely. "Like before, like with the bad men in the forest. Similar, but we're ready this time. We know they're coming." "Are we going to run away again?" "No, baby. We're going to stand and fight, but I need you to be brave to follow instructions exactly when I give them. Can you do that?" Sophie stood up and hugged him tightly. "I can be brave, Daddy. I learned from you." Daniel's throat tightened. 8 years old, and already she'd seen more violence than most adults. It wasn't fair, wasn't right, but it was their reality. Maria spoke up. "Mr. Hayes, I should go. This isn't my fight." "They know you've been here," Elena said gently. "Leaving now might make you a target. It's safer if you stay at least for a few days." Daniel could see the fear in Maria's eyes, but also determination. She was a kindergarten teacher, not a soldier, but she nodded. "Tell me what I need to do." That night, Roy's team arrived. They came separately, entering through the back door after dark, each carrying duffel bags full of equipment. Daniel knew 3 of them from previous operations, solid operators who'd kept their skills sharp in the civilian world. They set up a command post in the basement, installing cameras, motion sensors, and communication equipment. The house was transformed from a suburban home into a defended position, though nothing visible from the outside changed. "They're still watching." One of Roy's men reported monitoring the surveillance feeds. Same sedan rotating crews every 8 hours. "Let them watch, Mom," Daniel said. "I want them to think we're scared, hunkered down." The meeting with Senator Walsh the next day was illuminating. She arrived with minimal security, trusting Daniel's assessment that a large protective detail would only escalate tensions. They met in a private dining room swept for bugs by Roy's team. "The Prometheus Foundation has been lobbying hard," she said without preamble. "They're pushing for new defense contracts, claiming the Blackstone scandal was an aberration, and they're gaining traction." "How?" Elena asked. "After everything that came out, they're offering something the government wants: complete deniability. All operations handled through shell companies in countries without extradition treaties. They've learned from Blackstone's mistakes." "And Victoria Kane," Walsh's expression darkened. "Officially, she's a consultant. Unofficially, she's orchestrating something that has my contacts worried. There's chatter about a demonstration, something to prove their value." "A false flag operation," Daniel guessed. "Possibly, or something worse. My sources say they've been recruiting specific skill sets: demolition experts, cyber warfare specialists, people with CBRN training. CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear." Daniel felt ice in his veins. "They're planning an attack." "We think so, but we don't know where or when. That's why I need you." "Me? You're the bait, Mr. Hayes. Victoria Kane wants you badly enough to make mistakes. If we can use that, you want to use me as bait?" It wasn't a question. "I want to stop them before innocent people die, and you're our best chance." Daniel looked at Elena, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They'd wanted a normal life, peace, safety for Sophie. But peace was an illusion when people like Victoria Kane were free to operate. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. Walsh pulled out a secure phone. "Make contact. Let her know you're willing to talk. She'll assume it's a trap, but she'll come anyway. Her ego won't let her refuse. And when she comes, we'll be ready. Full tactical support, FBI, ATF, everyone. We end this cleanly, legally." Daniel took the phone, stared at it for a long moment. Once he made this call, there was no going back. The war would resume, and this time it would be final. He dialed the number Walsh provided. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Victoria Kane. This is Daniel Hayes." Silence for a heartbeat, then a soft laugh. "Mr. Hayes, I wondered when you'd call. We need to talk." "Yes, we do. You killed my brother." "Your brother killed my wife." And round we go. Where does it end, Mr. Hayes?" "That's what I want to discuss, face to face." Another laugh, harder this time. "You think I'm stupid? You're working with the government. This call is probably being traced. I'm calling because I want this over, for my daughter's sake. Name the place, the time, your conditions. Victoria was quiet for so long Daniel thought she'd hung up. Then, interesting. You're either very brave or very desperate. Both. Tomorrow night, there's an abandoned warehouse complex on the outskirts of Denver. I'll send coordinates 1 hour before. Come alone. My daughter. Bring her. Bring the journalist too. This concerns all of you. The line went dead. Daniel looked at Walsh, who was already on another phone coordinating with her team. She knows it's a trap, Elena said. Yes, Daniel agreed, but she'll come anyway. She can't resist the opportunity. They spent the next day preparing. Roy's team scouted possible locations for the meet, identifying likely warehouse complexes. The FBI positioned response teams around the city ready to move once they had a location. Elena worked with Maria to create a safe room in the house, somewhere Sophie could hide if things went wrong. As the sun set, Daniel stood in his daughter's room, watching her pack a small backpack with her most important possessions, her stuffed elephant, a photo of her mother, a book Daniel had been reading to her. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" she asked. Daniel knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe. And there are good people helping us, people who want to stop the bad ones." "But you can't promise." It wasn't a question. His 8-year-old daughter had learned that promises about safety were wishes, not guarantees. "No," he admitted. "I can't promise. But I can promise I'll fight for you with everything I have." Sophie hugged him tightly. "I know you will." The coordinates came exactly 1 hour before the meet. An abandoned meatpacking plant on the industrial east side closed for a decade. Roy's team was already moving, setting up overwatch positions. The FBI was coordinating their approach, careful not to spook Victoria's people. Daniel, Elena, and Sophie drove alone in their truck, following the GPS to the designated location. The building loomed against the night sky, dark and skeletal. A single light burned in a loading dock door. "Remember the plan?" Daniel told Elena. "If things go bad, I get Sophie out." "I know." They parked and walked toward the light, Sophie between them. Daniel could feel crosshairs on his back, knew Victoria's people were watching, but Roy's team was out there too, guardian angels in the darkness. The loading dock led to a massive refrigeration room, empty, except for Victoria Kane and 6 operators. She was smaller than Daniel had expected, but her presence filled the space. She had Marcus's eyes, cold, calculating, predatory. "Mr. Hayes," she said pleasantly. "Ms. Marquez, and little Sophie, you look just like your mother." "Don't talk about her mother," Daniel said quietly. Victoria smiled. "Touchy subject, I understand. Marcus was touchy for me too. Until you murdered him." "It was self-defense. It was execution. But I'm not here for revenge, not entirely." "Then what?" Victoria began pacing her operators, maintaining their positions. "You destroyed something that took decades to build. Blackstone, Prometheus, all of it. But you didn't destroy the need for it. Governments still need deniable operations. Corporations still need protection. The work continues just under new management." "Your management." "I'm rebuilding better, smarter, learning from past mistakes. No more cowboys like Marcus, no more sloppy operations that leave trails. Professional, efficient, invisible." "And you want what from us?" Victoria stopped pacing, faced them directly. "I want you to recant your testimony. Publicly state you were coerced, that the evidence was fabricated. Help restore confidence in private military contracting." Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're insane." "Am I?" "Your testimony destroyed lives, ended careers. Good people, patriots who served their country, are now in prison because of you." "Murderers are in prison because of us," Daniel corrected. "One person's murder is another's patriot. The operations Blackstone conducted saved American lives, prevented terrorist attacks. The methods were harsh, but the results spoke for themselves. You killed civilians, children. Collateral damage in a larger war. Something you once understood, Mr. Hayes. How many innocents did you kill in the name of freedom?" The words hit home as she'd known they would. Daniel had killed in service to his country, had made peace with necessary evils. But there was a line, and Blackstone had crossed it. "I won't recant," he said firmly. "Neither will Elena." "I thought you might say that." Victoria pulled out a tablet showing a live feed. It was Sophie's school children playing in the yard. "Cute school, very progressive, minimal security." Daniel stepped forward, but the operators raised their weapons. "You touch one child." "I won't have to. You're going to cooperate, or accidents will happen. Not just at the school, but everywhere you go. Your friends, Elena's family, everyone you care about will be in danger. Unless what? You work for me. One job using your particular skills. Complete it successfully, and we disappear from your lives forever." "What job?" Victoria smiled. "There's a senator causing problems for our rebuilding efforts. Patricia Walsh. She needs to have an accident." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Senator Walsh, who'd helped them, who was standing against the foundation. "I won't kill for you," Daniel said. "You've killed for worse people. At least with me you know what you're getting. Complete transparency, just one life to save dozens." "No." "Then Sophie will grow up without a father, and probably without Elena too. Accidents are so common these days." Daniel felt Sophie trembling beside him, trying to be brave but terrified. Elena's hand found his squeezing tight. They were trapped, but Daniel had been trapped before. "I need time to think," he said. "You have 30 seconds. Daniel's mind raced through options. Roy's team was outside, but any signal would result in a firefight with Sophie in the middle. The FBI was coming, but not fast enough. He needed to buy time. "If I do this," he said slowly, "I need guarantees, real ones, not just your word." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Such as, Sophie and Elena go into witness protection first, somewhere you can't reach them. Then I do your job." "Counteroffer. Elena and Sophie stay with my people as insurance. You complete the job, they go free." "That's not—" The wall exploded. Flashbang grenades filled the room with blinding light and deafening sound. Daniel reacted instantly, throwing himself over Sophie while pulling Elena down. Gunfire erupted, automatic weapons creating a deadly symphony. Through the chaos, Daniel saw Roy's team breaching from multiple points. The FBI was here too sooner than expected. Victoria's operators were good, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Victoria herself moved like liquid mercury, dodging through the firefight toward an exit. Daniel saw her go and made a choice. He pressed Sophie into Elena's arms. "Get her out!" he shouted over the gunfire, then went after Victoria. She was fast, but Daniel knew how she'd been trained, could predict her movements. He caught her at the exit, tackling her to the ground. They rolled, fighting with brutal efficiency. Victoria was skilled, using every dirty trick in the book. She went for his eyes, his throat, the bullet wound in his shoulder that had never fully healed. But Daniel had advantages, size, strength, and the rage of a father protecting his child. The fight ended when Victoria pulled a knife. Daniel caught her wrist twisted until the blade fell, then put her in a chokehold. Unlike with Marcus, he didn't hesitate. He held on until she went limp, unconscious, but alive. He wanted her to face justice, to rot in a cell thinking about her failures. He zip-tied her hands and feet, then looked back at the refrigeration room. The firefight was over. Victoria's operators were down, dead or captured. Roy stood in the center, weapon still raised, scanning for threats. "Sophie!" Daniel called out. "Here, Daddy!" She ran to him, Elena close behind. They were dusty, scared, but unharmed. Daniel pulled them both close, feeling their hearts beat against his chest. "It's over," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Senator Walsh arrived with the FBI cleanup team, surveying the scene with grim satisfaction. "Victoria Kane and 6 operators in custody," she said, "plus the intel from their communications equipment. This is Big Daniel. This breaks the foundation wide open." "There are others," Daniel said. "She mentioned someone above her, someone funding all this." "We'll find them. With Victoria in custody, people will talk. They always do when facing life in federal prison." But Victoria wasn't talking. Even in custody, even facing multiple life sentences, she maintained her silence. Her lawyers, expensive ones who appeared from nowhere, fought every charge, challenged every piece of evidence. Weeks passed. The trial was set, witnesses prepared, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Victoria was too calm, too confident for someone facing life in prison. The answer came at 3 in the morning, exactly 1 month after the warehouse confrontation. Daniel woke to the sound of Sophie screaming. He ran to her room, found her sitting up in bed, pointing at the window. There was something attached to the glass, a photo. Daniel approached, carefully examining it in the moonlight. It was a picture of Victoria Kane, in a business suit, standing outside a federal courthouse. Free. The phone rang. Daniel answered, already knowing who it would be. "Hello, Daniel." Victoria's voice was smooth, amused. "Did you really think prison could hold me? I have judges who owe me favors, prosecutors who value their family's safety. The charges have been dropped. Lack of evidence, they said. That's impossible. We had you cold. You had nothing that money and influence couldn't erase. But don't worry, I'm not coming after you. Not yet. I have bigger plans now, and frankly, you've become irrelevant. Then why call professional courtesy? You fought well, better than Marcus ever did. I respect that. So I'm giving you a choice. Disappear. Really disappear this time, and I'll pretend you don't exist. Stay, and you'll wish you'd taken my offer. We're not running. I thought you might say that. Your funeral. Literally. Eventually." The line went dead. Daniel looked at the photo again, then at Sophie, who was trying so hard to be brave. "Pack a bag," he told her gently. "We're going on a trip." But they didn't run. Instead, Daniel called every contact he had. Every favor owed every person who'd ever stood against corruption and violence. If the system couldn't hold Victoria Kane, then they'd have to find another way. Elena worked her media contacts, ensuring Victoria's release became a scandal. Public pressure mounted for a new investigation, one that couldn't be corrupted or influenced. Roy's team became permanent fixtures, rotating shifts to maintain security. Other veterans joined them, men and women who'd heard the story and refused to let Victoria win. Senator Walsh, though frustrated by the legal failure, continued pushing for congressional action. New laws were proposed, oversight committees formed, all aimed at preventing another Blackstone, another Prometheus Foundation. And somewhere in the shadows, Victoria Kane watched and waited, planning her next move in a game that seemed to have no end. But Daniel was done being reactive, done waiting for the next attack. If Victoria wanted a war, he'd give her one. Not with violence that was her way, not his anymore, but with truth, persistence, and the unwavering determination of a father protecting his family. The real fight was just beginning. The weeks following Victoria's release became a careful dance of vigilance and investigation. Daniel transformed their Denver home into something more than a fortress. It became a command center for a different kind of warfare. Elena worked tirelessly, her laptop always open, tracking shell companies and financial transactions that might lead to Victoria's backers. Every morning, Sophie asked the same question at breakfast. "Are we safe today, Daddy?" And every morning, Daniel gave the same answer, "Today we are." It was Roy who found the first real lead. He arrived one evening with mud on his boots and exhaustion etched into his face, having driven straight from Montana after meeting with an old CIA contact. "Victoria isn't working alone," he said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "She's partnered with someone called the Architect. Nobody knows their real name, but they've been orchestrating private military operations since the Cold War." Elena studied the documents, her journalist instincts firing. "These financial patterns, they go back 40 years. This person has been building a shadow empire. And Victoria is their newest general," Daniel added, piecing together the implications. "She gets operational control, they provide resources and protection." Sophie wandered into the kitchen, clutching her stuffed elephant. She'd been having trouble sleeping again, dark circles under her young eyes. "What are you looking at?" Daniel's instinct was to shield her, but Elena touched his arm gently. "She deserves to know what we're facing," she said quietly. So Daniel lifted Sophie onto his lap and explained in simple terms about the bad people who were still out there, about how they were working to stop them. Sophie listened solemnly, then asked a question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Why don't the police just arrest them?" "Because these people have money and power," Elena explained. "They've made friends with some of the people who are supposed to stop them." "That's not fair," Sophie said with the absolute moral clarity of childhood. "No," Daniel agreed. "It's not. That's why we have to be smarter than they are." That night after Sophie finally fell asleep, Daniel found Elena on the back porch staring out at the darkness beyond their yard. The motion sensors Roy had installed created little pools of light that flickered on and off as cats or raccoons passed through. "I've been thinking," she said as Daniel sat beside her, "about what Victoria said, about us being irrelevant. She was trying to get under our skin. Maybe. But what if she meant it? What if we're so focused on protecting ourselves that we're missing what she's really planning?" Daniel had been thinking the same thing. Victoria Kane wasn't the type to make idle threats or waste resources on personal vendettas. If she'd truly moved on from them, it meant she had a bigger target. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a breaking news alert on Elena's phone. A massive explosion at a chemical plant in Texas officially ruled an industrial accident. But Elena recognized the company name. It was a Department of Defense contractor that manufactured specialized materials for military applications. "That's the third one this month," she said, pulling up her files. "A weapons depot in Nevada, a research facility in Virginia. Now this." She's targeting defense infrastructure, Daniel realized. But why? What's the pattern? They spent hours mapping the attacks looking for connections. It was Sophie doing her homework at the same table who inadvertently provided the answer. "These are all on my map," she said, pointing to her social studies assignment about American military bases. "My teacher said these places help protect our soldiers." Daniel looked closer. Sophie was right. Each attacked facility was a crucial supplier for overseas military operations. Without them, American forces in certain regions would be vulnerable, undersupplied. "She's creating a gap," he said slowly, "a vulnerability that only private contractors could fill." Elena's eyes widened with understanding. "Create the problem, then sell the solution. The government would have no choice but to hire them." "We need to warn someone," Daniel said, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, the lights went out. Not just in their house, the entire neighborhood plunged into darkness. Daniel moved immediately, muscle memory taking over. He grabbed Sophie, pulling her away from the windows while Elena retrieved the emergency supplies they'd prepared. "Roy," Daniel called into his radio. "Power's out for 6 blocks." Roy's voice crackled back. "My team's checking the perimeter. Could be a standard outage, but..." The explosion cut him off. Not close, but close enough to rattle windows. To the east, an orange glow lit up the sky. "That's the power substation," Elena said, checking her phone, which still had battery. "Social media is lighting up. People are saying they saw armed men." Daniel's tactical phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Senator Walsh's voice stressed and urgent. "Daniel, they're moving. Multiple attacks across the city. Federal buildings infrastructure, it's coordinated. They're trying to create chaos." "Where are you at?" "Federal courthouse." "We're locked down, but..." Gunfire erupted in the background. "They're breaching Daniel. They're after the sealed indictments, the evidence we've been gathering." The line went dead. Daniel looked at Elena, and Sophie saw his own determination reflected in their eyes. They could wait for this to pass. Or they could act. "Take Sophie to the safe room, he told Elena. "No," Sophie said firmly. "We stick together. That's what you taught me." "Sophie, this is dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now, Daddy, but we're stronger together." 8 years old, and already she understood what Daniel was only beginning to accept. They couldn't protect her from this world, could only teach her to be strong within it. Roy burst through the back door, 2 of his men behind him. "We've got movement. 3 vehicles approaching tactical formation. This is it." Daniel made his choice. "We go to the courthouse. Victoria might have judges in her pocket, but she needs those documents destroyed to rebuild completely. If we can protect them..." "It's suicide," Roy interrupted. "She'll have teams all over that building." "Then we'll need help." Daniel pulled out his phone and did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He activated an emergency protocol from his SEAL days, a number that would connect him to Active Duty Special Operations Command. "This is Lieutenant Commander Hayes, authentication code Whiskey 779er. I have actionable intelligence on an active terrorist threat. Request immediate QRF support at the following coordinates." The voice on the other end was professionally skeptical. "Sir, you're listed as retired. Check with Admiral Morrison at JSOC. Tell him Daniel Hayes says the Prometheus Foundation is attacking federal facilities in Denver. He'll confirm my credentials." There was a pause then. Stand by. While they waited, Roy's team engaged the approaching vehicles. The firefight was brief but intense, the attackers not expecting such professional resistance. 2 vehicles retreated, the third was disabled, its occupants captured. The phone rang. Admiral Morrison himself, Daniel's old commanding officer. Hayes, what the hell is going on? Daniel explained quickly, efficiently, the way he'd been trained to deliver battlefield intelligence. Morrison listened, then swore creatively. I can have a team there in 30 minutes. Can you hold until then? We're not staying here, sir. We're going to the courthouse. Negative, that's... Sir, with respect, I'm a civilian now. I'm telling you where we'll be. Support or don't, but we're going. Morrison was quiet for a moment. You always were a stubborn son of a bitch. 30 minutes, Hayes. Try not to die before my boys get there. They moved fast, taking Roy's armored SUV. The city was in chaos, sirens everywhere, smoke rising from multiple locations. Victoria had turned Denver into a war zone, but Daniel recognized the tactic. Most of it was distraction designed to spread law enforcement thin. The real objective was the courthouse. They approached from the west using side streets to avoid the main combat zones. 3 blocks away, they could see the courthouse was under siege. Multiple breaching points, professional assault tactics. Victoria had brought an army. There, Elena pointed to a parking garage adjacent to the courthouse. We can access the underground tunnels from there. Daniel looked at her in surprise. I'm a journalist, she said with a slight smile. I know every government building's dirty secrets. They entered the garage fast, Roy's team securing each level as they descended. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a maintenance panel exactly where Elena said it would be. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and smelled of decades of decay. Sophie walked between Daniel and Elena, her small hand gripping her father's tightly. Behind them, Roy and his men moved like shadows, weapons ready. They emerged in the courthouse basement to find chaos. Federal agents were engaged in a running battle with Victoria's operators, the hallways filled with smoke and gunfire. Daniel recognized the defensive positions the agents were being pushed back systematically. We need to get to the evidence room. Senator Walsh's aide, Jennifer, appeared from behind an overturned desk, blood running from a gash on her forehead. 4th floor, but the elevators are down and the stairwells are compromised. Not all of them, Daniel said. During his testimony months ago, he'd memorized the building layout, another old habit. There's a service stairwell on the north side, probably not on their assault plan. They moved through the building like ghosts, avoiding the main firefights. The service stairwell was clear, but Daniel could hear footsteps above. Someone else had the same idea. Roy, take your team, flank them from the main corridor. We'll hit them from behind. Roy nodded and disappeared with his men. Daniel, Elena, and Sophie climbed quietly, Daniel carrying Sophie to keep her steps silent. On the 4th floor, they could hear voices, Victoria's men discussing explosive placement. They're going to blow the evidence room, Elena whispered. Daniel set Sophie down in an alcove. Stay here. Don't move until I come back. Promise you'll come back, Sophie said, her voice small but steady. I promise. Daniel and Elena crept forward. 3 men were rigging charges to the evidence room door, focused on their task. Daniel moved first, silent, as death taking down the nearest man with a chokehold. Elena grabbed his weapon, covering the corridor as Daniel engaged the other 2. The fight was brutal but brief. Daniel's training combined with the element of surprise gave him the advantage. Within seconds, all 3 were unconscious. He quickly disarmed the explosives, a simple setup designed for destruction rather than sophistication. Roy's team appeared from the main corridor, having cleared their section. Evidence room secure, but we've got a bigger problem. Victoria's here 5th floor. She's got the judge who was overseeing the sealed indictments. Judge Patterson. Daniel knew him, an honest man who'd refused to be bought or intimidated. If Victoria had him, she could force him to void the indictments, destroy the legal framework they'd built against the Foundation. Elena, get Sophie and get to the evidence room. Download everything you can to off-site servers. What are you going to do? End this. Daniel took 2 of Roy's men and headed for the 5th floor. The courthouse's executive level was eerily quiet after the chaos below. They found Victoria in the judge's chambers, 2 operators flanking her while she held a gun to Judge Patterson's head. Daniel, she said without turning around, I wondered when you'd show up. Hero Complex is so predictable. Let him go, Victoria. It's over. The military's coming. Your operation's blown. She turned then smiling. Is it I've destroyed half the evidence, corrupted the rest. Even if some survives, the chain of custody is broken. Any decent lawyer could get it thrown out. Maybe. But you're forgetting something. What's that? I don't need lawyers anymore. The window behind Victoria exploded as a sniper's bullet took out one of her operators. The second dove for cover as Roy's team breached from two directions. Victoria spun using Judge Patterson as a shield, but Daniel was already moving. The fight was different from his battle with Marcus. Victoria was skilled but smaller, relying on speed and technique rather than brute force. She fought dirty using everything as a weapon. A letter opener became a blade. A lamp became a club. But Daniel had one advantage she didn't expect: he wasn't fighting alone. Judge Patterson, 70 years old but a former Marine, threw his weight backward at a crucial moment, giving Daniel the opening he needed. He struck Victoria's wrist, sending her gun flying, then took her down with a leg sweep. She rolled, came up with a knife from somewhere, lunged at him. Daniel caught her wrist, and for a moment they stood frozen, testing each other's strength. "You can't stop what's coming," she hissed. "The architect has plans beyond your comprehension. This country will beg for our protection. From threats you create. From threats that already exist. We just help them along." The sound of helicopters filled the air. The military had arrived. Victoria's eyes flickered to the window, calculating escape routes. Daniel saw her acceptance that this battle was lost. "Another time, then," she said, and did something unexpected. She went limp, allowing herself to be taken down and restrained. As Roy's men zip-tied her hands, she looked up at Daniel with an expression that was almost admiring. "You're good, Hayes. Better than Marcus ever was. The architect's going to enjoy playing against you. This isn't a game. Everything's a game. You just haven't learned all the rules yet." The military teams flooded the building, securing the remaining threats with brutal efficiency. Admiral Morrison himself arrived, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Hayes, you look like hell." "Feel worse, sir." Morrison gestured to Victoria, who was being led away by federal agents, real ones this time, with military oversight. "Think it'll stick this time?" "It has to." But even as he said it, Daniel wondered. Victoria had seemed too calm, too accepting of capture, like this was part of a larger plan he couldn't see yet. He found Elena and Sophie in the evidence room, Elena's laptop connected to multiple servers, uploading terabytes of data. "It's all here," she said. "Everything. Financial records, operational plans, names of everyone involved. It's going worldwide, news agencies, law enforcement, intelligence services. They can't bury this." Sophie ran to him, and he lifted her into his arms, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Always will, baby girl." Senator Walsh arrived looking haggard but victorious. "We did it. With military custody and international attention, Victoria's not walking away this time." "What about the architect?" Daniel asked. Walsh's expression darkened. "Still a ghost, but we've cut off their operational arm. Without Victoria, without the Foundation's resources, they're crippled." Daniel wanted to believe that, but something nagged at him. In the judge's chambers, Victoria had said the architect would enjoy playing against him. Not would have enjoyed. Would enjoy. Present tense. Future tense. The cleanup took hours. By dawn, Denver looked like a war zone, smoke still rising from multiple locations. Emergency vehicles everywhere. The attack was already being called the worst domestic terrorism incident in a decade. Victoria Kane's face was on every news channel, the Prometheus Foundation's activities dissected by every analyst. But in the suburban home where Daniel, Elena, and Sophie finally returned exhausted and battered, a package waited on the doorstep. No postmark, no delivery service markings. Just Daniel's name in elegant handwriting. Inside was a chess piece, a black king, and a note. "Well played, Mr. Hayes, but the game is far from over. Your move. The architect." Daniel showed it to Elena, who was helping Sophie with the minor cuts and bruises she'd acquired during their escape. "They're still out there," she said quietly. "Yes. We can't keep living like this. Sophie can't keep living like this." Daniel looked at his daughter, brave beyond her years, but still just a child who deserves safety, normalcy, peace. Then he looked at the chess piece, understanding the message. The architect saw this as a game, But games had rules, patterns, strategies that could be learned and countered. Then we changed the rules, he said. Over the next weeks as Victoria's trial began, this time under military tribunal with no possibility of judicial corruption. Daniel began his own investigation into the architect. He reached out to contacts worldwide following financial threads that went back decades. Elena used her journalistic network to uncover patterns connections that others had missed. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. The architect wasn't one person, but a position passed down through generations. A shadow organization that had been manipulating conflicts since World War II, playing all sides, profiting from chaos. They're not just war profiteers, Elena said one evening, surrounded by documents and laptop screens. They're war creators. Every major conflict in the last 50 years has their fingerprints on it. Then we expose them, like we did with Blackstone. It's not that simple. They've had decades to hide their tracks to embed themselves in legitimate businesses' governments. They're like a cancer that's metastasized throughout the entire system. Sophie, doing homework at the same table, looked up. In science class, we learned that to fight cancer, sometimes you need to make the body stronger, not just attack the disease. Daniel and Elena exchanged glances, from the mouths of babes again. She's right, Elena said slowly. We can't just fight them. We need to build something stronger, a network of our own. And so they began. Using the credibility earned from exposing Blackstone and stopping Victoria, they reached out to others who'd fought similar battles. Journalists who'd been threatened for investigating corruption, veterans who'd refused illegal orders, law enforcement officers who'd stood against infiltration by criminal elements. It started small, a secure communication network sharing intelligence and resources. But it grew. Within 6 months, they had cells in 12 countries, all committed to exposing and fighting the shadow organizations that thrived on conflict and chaos. Victoria, from her military prison cell, somehow got a message to Daniel: "You're learning. The architect must be pleased." Daniel didn't respond, but he understood now. This wasn't about winning a single battle or even a war. This was about evolution, about becoming something capable of fighting an enemy that had evolved over decades. Sophie grew stronger too, though Daniel wished she didn't have to. She learned self-defense from Roy, investigation techniques from Elena. And from Daniel, she learned the most important lesson, that standing against evil wasn't a choice but a responsibility, especially for those strong enough to fight. 1 year after the Denver attack, they received another package. This time it contained a white king and a simple message: "Your move was unexpected. Interesting. The game continues." Daniel placed the white king next to the black one on his desk. The architect was right. The game did continue. But now Daniel wasn't playing alone. He had Elena, brilliant and unbreakable. He had Sophie, growing into someone who would someday be stronger than all of them. He had Roy and his team, Senator Walsh and her allies, and a growing network of people who refused to let the shadows win. The war wasn't over. It might never be truly over. But for the first time since Sarah's death, since that night in the rain, when a wounded woman stumbled out of the forest, Daniel felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. Not hope that the fight would end, but hope that it was worth fighting. Hope that Sophie would inherit a world where the architects and Victoria Keynes couldn't operate with impunity. Hope that the truth properly wielded was stronger than all the lies money could buy. That night, as Daniel tucked Sophie into bed in their reinforced home with its security systems and watchful protectors, she asked him a question that he'd been dreading. "Daddy, will I have to fight them someday? The bad people." Daniel wanted to lie, to promise her a future free from this burden, but she deserved truth. "Maybe," he said gently, "but if you do, you won't fight alone. You'll have us and others like us, and you'll be ready." Sophie nodded, accepting this with the matter-of-fact courage that still amazed him. "Good, because someone needs to stop them. Someone always needs to stand up to bullies." After she fell asleep, Daniel stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe peacefully, despite everything she'd endured. Elena appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We've given her a hard life," Elena said quietly. "We've given her a meaningful life," Daniel corrected. "That's rare and more valuable." Outside, Roy's team maintained their watch. Somewhere in the world, the architect was planning their next move. Victoria Kane sat in a cell she'd never escaped from her empire in ruins. And in Denver, in a suburban home that had become a fortress of hope, a family forged by fire, prepared for whatever came next. The game continued, but Daniel Hayes was no longer running. He was no longer just surviving. He was building something, a legacy of resistance that would outlive them all. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The chess pieces sat on his desk, black and white, locked in eternal opposition. But chess was just a metaphor. Real life was messier, more complex, with stakes that couldn't be captured in wins and losses. Real life was Sophie's laughter, Elena's determination, the brotherhood of warriors who'd chosen justice over profit. Real life was worth fighting for, and so they would fight for as long as it took against whatever came together. The war was far from over, but for tonight in this moment, they were winning. And that was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. The architect would move and they would counter. The game would evolve, and so would they. But tonight, Daniel Hayes stood watch over his family, his found family, his chosen family, and knew that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, unbroken, unafraid.